Hello, this is Jay Mitchell, and we're back with another episode of the Libertarian Uncensored podcast, going over all the posts on the Libertarian Uncensored subreddit. Let's get right into it. So first we have, if it gets pulled off, it may just do something. Posted by Ragnar OKXG, and that's looks like some poster they shared. It says we're not asking, we're shutting it down. Mass blackout November 25th to December 2nd. The largest economic blackout protest in the U.S. history begins November 25th. No work, no spending, no restaurants, no projects, no events, no restaurants. They wrote no restaurants twice, it looks like. And they said no backing out, for exclamation points, prepare for the impact, exclamation point. To prevent quote-unquote spike spending before and after the blackout, we asked all persons to purchase goods needed from community-owned stores in March leading up to and after the dates. This helps with sustained impact and keeps our money out of the mega businesses' pockets. And then it says coordinated national pushback, maximum local impact. And yeah, personally, I don't think an economic blackout's going to really work because, it's mostly just something that I think they've tried like 2 or 3 of them already and they didn't work. It's mostly just something that terminally online Redditors say to virtue signal about how progressive they are. Oh, I'm not spending my money on the big corporations. I'm having an economic blackout. And then, the economic blackout comes and goes. No one really notices. And yeah, personally, if you want to have an economic blackout and not spend your money on at big businesses for a week, I think that's fine. Spend your money when and however you feel like it. But with that being said, I personally don't think it will have that much of an effect. It's a lot like all the No Kings protests or whatever the current protests that the woke redditors are doing is. It's mostly just virtue signaling. And people are it's gonna come and go, and that's very much what a lot of Reddit protests seem to be. They seem to be they do it for a day and then it comes and goes, and that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have man detained for playing the Imperial March behind National Guard patrol. That's from Twitter.com, supposed to be like UX, and that looks like a tweet from Washington Post. In late August, Sam O'Hara began filming National Guard troops in DC while playing the Imperial March from his phone on a handheld speaker and posted the video to his TikTok account. He was detained September 11th. And yeah, personally, I do think you should be able to play music wherever you want to as long as you're in a public space. But with that being said, I would think most people would know better than to purposely agitate members of the National Guard or any branch of law enforcement for that matter. They can arrest you for whatever reason they feel like. I personally think purposely agitating them is just get a recipe to get in trouble. But ultimately, I do think people should be able to just try to do whatever they feel like. If he wanted to do that, that's fine. But I do think that it is a recipe to get in trouble. It's not like he was just minding his own business. He was trying to troll them, and they arrested him as a result. And I personally wouldn't have arrested him if I was a cop. I would say he's just doing his free expression. But ultimately, it comes down to the discretion that the cops, the National Guard, and any law enforcement has when it comes to arresting. And they can, and if you think that if you irk them enough, they'll arrest you, even if you're doing something that is entirely legal. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have Texas will target professors pushing leftist ideologies, Greg Abbott says, from Advocate.com, posted by Ninja Lover. And yeah, personally, I think, professors should be able to teach whatever they want to. I do agree with Greg Abbott that a lot of them do push leftist ideologies. I remember my academic advisor in college had a picture of Vladimir Lenin on the walls of her office. But, the libertarian perspective is, we need to get the state out of education. If they want to teach leftist ideologies or rightist ideologies or whatever ideologies they want to teach, they should be able to. But the problem is a lot of college, university education, and secondary education in general, in addition to primary education, it's all taxpayer funded because of public schools. I think libertarian position is there should be no public schools; they should all be private. That way, the state will have less control over them, so stuff like this can't happen. And people won't have to be forced to go to them even if they don't want to. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have Trump. We could never let what happened in the 2020 election happen again. We just can't let that happen. I know Cash is working on it. Everyone is working on it. And certainly Tulsi is working on it. We can't let this happen again to our country. Posted by Donald Key, and that's a cross post from the Boomers Being Fools subreddit. And I guess it's a quote of Trump saying exactly that. And Yeah, personally, I think the libertarian position is, if you want to say elections are rigged like Trump's doing here, I think you should be able to. Reddit always laughs and says, "Oh, look at Trump and his band of MAGA QAnon knuckleheads. They're saying the 2020 election is rigged." All the meanwhile denying the 2016 and 24 results because their side lost. It just doesn't it just matters who's in the in group, who's in the out group. When their side loses an election, they cry fraud, but when the other side does it, it's the worst thing ever. When their side does it, it's completely justified. And yeah, personally, I didn't really care for Kamala Harris, but at least she didn't harp on how her election was rigged against her. Hillary kind of did when she lost. She said, "Oh, Russia, it was due to Russia collusion." But I do think it's to Donald Trump. He should stop pushing that the election was stolen. If he wants to believe it's stolen and vocalize such, that's fine. But he won the last election. So I would just get over it. But Donald Trump, he's not a guy who really gets over things. He likes to perseverate on things, and that's very much one of his MOs. And if he wants to perseverate, that's fine. But it's gonna get on people's nerves after a while. Personally, I think Donald Trump's already on a lot of people's nerves after because since the news cycle can't shut up about the guy over every day over the past decade. But ultimately, he should be able to say whatever he wants. If he wants to say the 2020 election is rigged, that's fine. But Reddit only cares since he's out group rather than in group. If he was in group saying the 2024 election was rigged, Reddit would think it's the greatest thing ever. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next we have Trump. I don't think we're going to necessarily ask for a declaration of war. I think we're just going to kill people, okay? We're going to kill them. They're going to be like dead, posted by CH4Locks, and that's a cross post from the Law subreddit. And I guess that's a clip of Trump saying that on Fox News. And yeah, personally, I don't really care for that rhetoric, but ultimately Trump is right in that the state can just kill anyone whoever it wants to, pretty much and ultimately a lot of times they won't be held accountable for it since they control the court system as well. And yeah, personally, I don't really care for rhetoric like that, but if the government has a legal monopoly, it's forced to pretty much kill whoever it wants to, and oftentimes, as I said earlier, you can't, there isn't even a means to hold them accountable since they control the legal system as well, so that's my thoughts there. Next we have the GOP quote-unquote capitalism is central planning with MAGA branding from Reason.com, posted by Fasty Ruviness 739, and that's a cross post from the anarcho-capitalism subreddit. And yeah, personally, I think, I would agree with that, just because the GOP markets itself as anti-communist and anti-socialist doesn't mean it actually is. I would argue in many ways they're more socialist and communist than the Democrats are currently. And yeah, personally, if they want to do central planning, they have the monopoly and least the force to justify pretty much whatever they feel like. But it's just going to show you how a lot of politicians are hypocrites. They'll say one thing and then do the opposite. It just goes, and that's increasingly why I think no one has any faith in politicians anymore, and that's why Donald Trump's in power in the first place. He says, "Oh, I'm not a typical politician," even though I would say by many respects he pretty much is. He's a guy who says one thing and then does the opposite, just like pretty much every other two-faced politician. Then we have video, we're just gonna kill people, posted by RagnarokHD, and that's crosspost from the Progressive HQ subreddit. And yeah, personally, as I said, this is the same clip I think from the last time we talked about it, how he said, "Oh, we're just gonna kill people in Venezuela who are bringing drugs to the country." And yeah, personally, I don't think that's good. I don't think you should. I do think illegal drugs. I personally don't really care for them. But if Venezuelan drug traffickers do want to bring drugs here, ultimately they should be able to justify whatever they feel like. And it's the free market and free trade and free movement. And I personally don't really care for Venezuela or its government. I think you could argue its government sending more personally to cause discord in the U.S. But with that being said, that ultimately people are going to justify regardless of the system of government place, and I don't think that justifies status abuses of power like Trump's doing in regards to shooting down all the Venezuelan boats. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next we have Your Town Next, posted by Paton13, and that looks like a Tom the Dancing Bug comic, and that's like a Doonesbury or a Bloom County. It's pretty much just a leftist circle jerk that you might find on like Political Humor or the comic subreddit. And yeah, it's a Chagrin Falls, My Country shit on the And then the one guy says, I told you, Cap, no orange juice, we're not millionaires. Oh, I'm getting one of those alarms on my phone. The president just declared our town a war ravaged hellhole, Sugar Falls. He says we're raiding Antifa thugs and on the streets, and that all storefronts are boarded up. People are afraid to leave their homes. Really, it's the National Guard. And then the National Guard says, let's go, commie. They got Larry. He's not Antifa. He's vegan. Same thing. Don't struggle back. I'm Ulysses and you have no probable cause. It's a Kavanaugh stop, Beaner. If you're brown, we can take you downtown. Isn't there some way to stop this? If they hear that we're resisting Trump, and then the guy points to the sky, a gold-plated fire jet, and then all the brown liquid foosh falls on them. I thought that video was AI generated. The metaphor was too perfect for it to be fake. You gotta admit, his ability to produce as much as impressive must be the McDonald's. And yeah, personally, that's just pretty much all. I don't really care for Trump when he's doing his shit posting, like when he posted the video of him flying in the jet, dropping all the brown liquid on protesters, which was implied to be shit. But I don't really care for this either. There's one thing I can't stand. It's a circle jerk, which is why I tend to interact with people I disagree with online rather than people I agree with. And it just goes to show you that a lot of people just like circle jerking themselves, and it gets tiring after a while. I don't really like how the internet's becoming an AI bot-ridden hellhole, but it might just be preferable to stuff like this. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have this plaza is restricted from the First Amendment activity. 2 laughing emojis. Okay, guy, posted by Donald Key, and that's cross-post from the cringe TikTok subreddit. And that looks like a TikTok from Asmin Islami, who's waving a Palestinian flag, and the officer says, "Oh, you can't do that here. This plaza is restricted from First Amendment activity." And yeah, personally, I would say that it's interesting how Reddit suddenly cares for the First Amendment after years of being against it during the Biden administration. But the second the Orange Man comes back into power, it's suddenly the most important thing ever. It's a lot of people only want speech they agree with to be legal, and I'm sure if this was a guy if Kamala won the election, this was a guy with a MAGA flag and then the officer said the same thing, Reddit would think it's the greatest thing ever. But since it's an in-group member rather than an out-group member, Reddit thinks it's the worst thing ever. And yeah, that's my thoughts on that issue. Then we have Trump is going to be president in 2028. MAGA leader bluntly declares there's a plan from NJ.com, posted by Ninja Lover. And yeah, personally, this is more Reddit. Oh, Trump's going to doom posting. Trump's going to be in office forever. Personally, I think a delusional Redditor will probably take him out. Thomas Matthew Crooks already tried, and I think maybe there'll be another one soon. But I definitely do think Trump's days in office are numbered. I think a lot of people are tired of him already. I don't think he's going to be there forever. He's almost 80. If some delusional writer doesn't take him out, will surely be natural causes, especially if his diet and since his diet isn't that good and he doesn't seem to be in the best physical health. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have a DC man was arrested for mocking National Guard troops at Star Wars Imperial March. Now he's suing from Reason.com, posted by Jolly Porcupine. And as I said earlier, I do believe he should have the right to play the Imperial March to mock the National Guard troops. But, I personally do think, you should know better than to purposely agitate police officers or any law enforcement. And that's my thoughts on that issue, because, they can arrest you for whatever reasons they want to, even if it's something that's not illegal. Then we have blowing up these boats has nothing to do with fentanyl, posted by Fast C Rubeness 739, posted by Anarcho-Capitalism, and that looks like a video of Rand Paul on Piers Morgan, who says, Rand Paul, there is no fentanyl as well, let's just be a little bit, there's none being made. And I agree with Rand Paul there. I think mostly they're blowing up the boats because they want regime change in Venezuela, and it just goes to show you, Trump might market himself as, oh, I'm an anti-neocon candidate, I'm against all the foreign wars, but then he comes to office and he's suddenly for all the foreign wars like Ukraine and Israel, and now he's pushing for us to get back into Afghanistan, and that's on top of all this Venezuela stuff. And just goes to show you, two-faced politicians are just par for the course, sadly. And Trump might mark himself as different than these two-faced politician establishment, but he's really just par for the course in that regard. Next, we have, under orders from President Donald Trump, the FBI started visiting the homes of innocent protesters from KenKlippenstein.com, posted by Donald Key, and that's crosspost from the LOL subreddit. And yeah, personally, I don't really care for that, but the FBI can the FBI or any government agency can come break into your house at any time, and oftentimes there's nothing that you can do about it. They used to have to need a warrant, but now thanks to the Patriot Act, they can even get away with not having a warrant, and it just goes to show you that the state can ultimately justify whatever it feels like. And what are you gonna do if you don't like it? They had the legal monopoly on the use of force, and you don't. So yeah, personally, if they came to my horse, I wouldn't be answering. I don't know if I would be answering the door. I'd be saying, I have my rights. You shouldn't be storming into my house. But ultimately, they can justify whatever they feel like, and oftentimes, as I said, they won't be held accountable since the state controls the legal system as well. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have clear violation of the Constitution posted by Donald Key, and that's cross-post from the Murder by Word subreddit. Tweet from Justin Amash. The Constitution does not require the President to notify Congress. It requires the President to get permission from Congress. And that was him quote tweeting Disclosed TV. Trump says he will notify Congress if U.S. military strikes likely occur after against drug traffickers on foreign soil. We have to do it to save lives. And yeah, it just goes to show you, the president really the government doesn't even have to uphold the pretext of following the Constitution anymore. Ever since the ink was dry, the Constitution's been various degrees of dead in the water. But Trump, he might mark himself as a Constitution-abiding president, but he cares for the Constitution like pretty much all of his predecessors, like pretty much every one of his predecessors did, especially since like FDR took office. Not at all, and it just goes to show you that the Constitution's merely just words on a piece of paper. What matters is whose authority people are going to follow, and for a lot of people, that's the president. And it just goes to show you that it's a great case against democracy. How I'd rather much have a King Thomas Massey than a democratically elected president like Donald Trump, because just because something's democratically elected like Donald Trump is, doesn't mean they're gonna be libertarian and support individual rights and all that, because it's it's a great argument against democracy. But Reddit loves democracy. But whenever they say, "Oh, we need to support democracy," you have to remind them that Donald Trump won the popular vote this time, and that's what democracy is. And if you don't like him, you probably shouldn't like democracy either. And that's my thoughts on that issue. And I think we're gonna wrap it up there. I'll see you guys in the next episode. Bye.